The day dawned cloudy in the small town of Bridgewater, in the countryside of Massachusetts. Margaret, wearing her simple cotton dress, stood on the porch of the large house she shared with Oliver. The wind rustled the leaves of the tall trees surrounding the property, creating a melancholic melody that seemed to reflect the past few months of her life. The house was vast, yet lonely, with its gray facade and windows that rarely opened. To the few neighbors who knew them, Margaret and Oliver were a reserved couple, perhaps eccentric. He, a middle-aged man with an air of sophistication and an intense gaze, was known for his ability to control every detail of his life. She, a young and delicate woman, was always seen with a shy smile, as if she were always trying to please. "Margie, come have coffee before it gets cold," called Oliver from the kitchen door. His voice was calm, but carried a note of authority that made Margaret quicken her steps. She entered the kitchen, where the table was meticulously set. Golden toast, scrambled eggs, stacked pancakes, and a jug of fresh orange juice awaited her. It was always like this: abundance, perfection, control. Oliver insisted on cooking for her, something that, at the beginning of their marriage, seemed like a romantic gesture, but, over time, became an oppressive ritual. "You need to eat more, Margie. You're so skinny. I worry about you," he said, serving a generous portion of pancakes on her plate. Margaret smiled, but something in her gaze betrayed fatigue. Oliver sat across from her, watching each bite she took. He never ate much, only sampling a small amount while monitoring Margaret. The discomfort inside her grew, but her desire to avoid conflict made her yield. As the months passed, Margaret's body began to change. The dresses that once fit her perfectly now squeezed in places they never had before. She avoided the mirror, but she could not ignore Oliver's satisfied glances. He never commented directly, but his insistence that she eat more was constant, almost obsessive. One night, Margaret woke with a start. The sound of the wind shaking the trees seemed louder than usual. She turned to her side and saw the empty bed. Oliver wasn't there. She got up silently and went downstairs. The light in Oliver's office was on. She hesitated, but curiosity got the better of her. The door was slightly ajar, and Margaret peeked inside. Oliver was sitting at the desk, a notebook in his hands. He was writing something with an intense expression. Next to him, stacks of similar notebooks were neatly organized. Margaret held her breath. When he finally turned off the light and went upstairs, she waited a few minutes before entering the office. The notebooks were detailed, almost clinical. He had recorded everything Margaret ate, the weight she gained, the changes in her body. It was as though it were an experiment. Margaret's heart raced when she found a record of another woman, Catherine. The name was accompanied by notes similar to hers. A faded photograph showed a young and beautiful woman, but with an empty gaze that made Margaret shudder. On the last page, there was only one sentence: status, missing. In the following days, Margaret tried to act normally, but inside her grew a feeling of fear mixed with anger. She knew she had to do something, but confronting Oliver directly seemed dangerous. She began to pretend submission, eating everything he offered and smiling whenever he complimented her. But secretly, she was formulating a plan. On a rainy night, Margaret put her plan into action. While Oliver prepared a glass of wine for both of them, she slipped a sleeping pill into his drink. When he finally fell asleep on the couch, Margaret tied his arms and legs with ribbons she found in the basement. The look on Oliver's face when he woke was one of surprise, followed by fury, but Margaret remained calm. "You always wanted to feed me, Oliver. Today, I'm going to return the favor," she said with a cold smile. She brought a tray full of food and began forcing him to eat, plate after plate. He tried to resist, but Margaret's strength came from the desperation built up over months. When Oliver could no longer continue, Margaret called the police. She handed over the notebooks as evidence, revealing her husband's dark past. The story spread throughout the town, and Margaret became a symbol of resistance and courage. Now free and determined, Margaret started over. The house was sold, and she moved far away, leaving behind the shadows of the past. but the memory of Oliver and his victims would never completely leave her. She swore she would use her experience to help other women, ensuring that no one else would go through what she had. The tension between Margaret and Oliver had continued to grow, even if silently. She tried to maintain the appearance of normalcy, but each meal, each controlling gesture from Oliver, was another weight on her shoulders. Margaret knew she had to act, but she also understood that any rash move could put her life at risk. One autumn morning, while Oliver took his usual walk around the grounds of the house, Margaret saw an opportunity to investigate further. She remembered the notebooks she had found in the office and decided to search other places in the house for clues. There was a locked pantry in the basement that had always intrigued Margaret. Oliver never mentioned it, but kept it carefully shut. With the key she found in a drawer of the office, Margaret descended to the basement. The smell of mold and old wood filled the air, and she felt a chill run down her spine. The key turned in the lock with a sharp click, and the door opened, revealing a space more disturbing than she could have imagined. Shelves lined with notebooks, photographs, and personal items from unknown women were scattered throughout the room. Each shelf seemed dedicated to a victim. Margaret recognized Catherine's name on one of the notebooks and felt a lump in her throat. With every page she flipped through, she became more horrified. Oliver's notes were detailed and clinical, as if the women were projects he manipulated until reaching a sick goal. At the back of the room, Margaret found a large box, bound with chains and locks. Curiosity and fear mixed as she searched for the right key in the bunch she had taken. When she finally opened the box, she found women's clothing, diaries, and a pile of photographs showing the women before and after meeting Oliver. The contrast was devastating. Happy, lively faces in the first images, followed by empty expressions and visibly altered bodies in the last ones. Margaret felt her stomach churn. It was as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. The thought that she might meet the same fate as those women terrified her, but it also stirred something new inside her, anger. For the first time, Margaret didn't feel powerless. She knew too much to continue being a passive victim. When she heard Oliver's footsteps upstairs, Margaret quickly closed the box and locked the pantry door. She carefully ascended the stairs, trying not to let her panic show. Oliver greeted her with a smile, as if nothing was out of place. "Are you okay, dear? You look a little pale," he commented, serving her a cup of tea. Margaret merely nodded, mumbling something about not having slept well. In the following days, Margaret began to plan every move with precision. She knew she needed enough evidence to incriminate Oliver, but she also had to ensure her own safety. She started hiding small personal items that could serve as proof, all while pretending to submit to the life he had planned for her. Oblivious to Margaret's internal transformation, Oliver continued with his obsessive behavior. He seemed more satisfied every day, as if nearing the completion of another of his projects. Margaret, however, knew that his satisfaction would be her downfall. She was determined to turn the game around. One quiet night, Margaret did something she had never done before. She wrote a letter. In it, she detailed everything she had discovered about Oliver, her suspicions, and the evidence she had found. She hid the letter in a safe place with instructions for it to be found if something happened to her. The tension in the house was palpable. Oliver was beginning to notice something was different about Margaret, but he couldn't quite pinpoint what. She, on the other hand, felt strengthened. Each day was a silent battle, but she knew she was getting closer to the moment when everything would change. Margaret would no longer be a victim. She was ready to confront Oliver, but she knew she needed to wait for the right moment to act. That moment was getting closer every day. Margaret knew the time to act was near. Each day spent with Oliver was a mix of fear and suppressed anger. The nights were longer, and the silence in the house more suffocating. Oliver, though controlled, began to show signs of suspicion. He watched Margaret more closely, asking trivial questions, but always with hidden intentions. One afternoon, while Margaret was cleaning the kitchen, Oliver came in with a stack of papers in hand. He stared at her for a long moment before placing the documents on the table. "Dear, I thought we should make a new will," he said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Margaret felt a chill. Oliver's tone was gentle, but there was something threatening in his posture. She disguised her discomfort. Nodding in agreement, he briefly explained the need to secure the future, but Margaret knew this was just another attempt at control. That night, Margaret decided it was time to take the next step. She waited until Oliver was deeply asleep. There was something comforting about the rhythmic sound of his breathing. Margaret grabbed the phone she had hidden behind a shelf in the basement and began taking photos of the evidence she had gathered: diaries, old photos, personal items from the women Oliver had destroyed. Everything was carefully documented. Suddenly, creaking sound echoed through the house. Margaret froze. She ascended the stairs with her heart racing, but when she reached the bedroom, she found Oliver still asleep. She breathed a sigh of relief, but she knew her window of opportunity was closing. The next morning, Oliver seemed more watchful than usual. He observed her while she prepared breakfast, his eyes analyzing each movement. "You've been so distracted lately, Margaret. Is something bothering you?" he asked, his voice laced with suspicion. Margaret smiled gently, masking the tension. "No, just worried about the winter. I want to make sure we have enough firewood for the fireplace." Oliver narrowed his eyes, but didn't reply. The atmosphere between them was becoming unbearable. Later that day, Margaret made a drastic decision. She knew she needed to escape before Oliver realized how much she knew. She packed a small bag with essentials and hid it in a corner of the basement. She wrote another letter, this time detailing her plans, and hid it along with the evidence in the wall's attic space. That night, Margaret did something she never thought she was capable of. She put a sleeping pill in Oliver's wine during dinner. He watched her as she drank, as if knowing something was wrong, but eventually gave in to his fatigue. Once Oliver fell asleep, Margaret moved quickly. She grabbed the bag, the evidence, and slipped out the back door. But when she reached the woods, she heard a sound that froze her blood: footsteps. "Margaret!" Oliver's voice echoed through the darkness. He was awake. Margaret ran, her heart pounding in her chest. The shadows of the trees seemed to swallow her as she tried to escape. But Oliver was faster. He caught up with her near a creek, grabbing her with force. "Did you think you could fool me?" he said, his voice low and dangerous. Margaret didn't respond. Instead, she grabbed a large rock beside her and struck Oliver in the head with all the strength she had. He fell to the ground, dazed, but still conscious. Without wasting any time, Margaret ran back to the house. She locked all the doors and called the police, explaining everything she had discovered. As she waited, the sound of banging on the door echoed through the house. Oliver was trying to get in. When the police finally arrived, they found Oliver unconscious on the porch, bleeding and handcuffed. Margaret handed over all the evidence, ensuring that he would have no way to escape justice. But the nightmare wasn't over yet. Margaret knew she would need to fight to rebuild her life and overcome the trauma Oliver had caused. But for the first time, she felt a spark of hope. She was free. The sunrise brought a strange tranquility to Margaret. As the golden rays bathed the now empty house, she sat on the front stairs, watching the police take Oliver away. Her hands still trembled, and her heart seemed unwilling to slow down. But she knew this was the first step in leaving the nightmare behind. Hours later, Sheriff Willard returned with a serious expression. He was holding Oliver's notebook, the disturbing journal detailing the horrors Margaret had endured and her husband's crimes. "Margaret, you were incredibly brave. This will ensure he never leaves prison. But I need to know, is there anything else you haven't told us?" Margaret hesitated. There were things not in the journal, moments of silent terror she was afraid to revisit. But she knew that the more truths came to light, the stronger the case against Oliver would be. "He constantly threatened me," she said firmly, "and I know there were others. Other women before me. You need to investigate the backyard garden. There's a basement there. I never had the courage to go in, but I know he used that place." The investigation team arrived at dusk. Margaret stayed in the police car, watching from a distance as the detectives dug and explored the basement Oliver had kept secret. When they uncovered the first traces of women's clothing buried there, along with personal items, the confirmation of horror was evident. Margaret felt her stomach churn, but also a bitter satisfaction. Finally, he would pay for everything. That night, the house was strangely silent. Margaret was allowed to stay for a few more days until she decided where to go. Every corner of the house seemed charged with memories, but she decided she needed to face it head on. Margaret walked to the bedroom she had once shared with Oliver. On the bedside table, she found a small photo frame with a picture of the two of them. No matter how distorted their relationship had become, she realized that a part of her still mourned the loss of the man she once thought she knew. But that sadness didn't erase the relief she felt now. The following days brought more revelations. Oliver's story made headlines in the local newspapers, and Margaret was sought after by journalists and curious onlookers. But she chose to remain reclusive, speaking only with the detectives and the lawyer now helping her reorganize her life. However, there was something deeper that Margaret needed to confront: the emotional impact of everything she had lived through. She began attending a support group for abuse victims, where she found people who understood her pain. Each session was a mix of tears and small moments of shared courage. One night, during one of these meetings, Margaret heard a woman say, "We are survivors, not victims. What they did to us doesn't define who we are. It defines who they are." These words echoed in Margaret's mind for days. Slowly, she began to see that despite everything, she still had a life ahead of her. Margaret also decided to actively cooperate with the investigations. She shared all her memories, even the most painful ones, to ensure no other woman would go through what she had. Her courage inspired other survivors to come forward, creating a wave of solidarity in the community. Time passed, and the house that had once been a prison became a symbol of resilience. Margaret sold the property and donated part of the money to organizations that helped women in danger. She found a small apartment in the city where she began a new life. But Margaret's greatest victory was internal. Each day was an opportunity to rebuild her trust, rediscover who she had been before Oliver, and most importantly, decide who she wanted to be from then on. Oliver's trial was scheduled for the end of the year. Margaret attended, sitting in the front row. She looked at him, now as vulnerable as he had tried to make her. When she was called to testify, her voice didn't tremble. She told her story with a clarity that impressed everyone in the courtroom. When the sentence was announced, life in prison without the possibility of parole, Margaret felt a wave of emotions. It wasn't just an end, but a new beginning. Oliver no longer had power over her. As she left the courthouse, Margaret looked up at the sky and smiled for the first time in a long time. Freedom had never tasted so sweet. The months following the trial brought a mix of peace and challenges for Margaret. The world seemed different now, more open and full of possibilities, but it also carried scars from the past. Still, she was determined to move forward and find a new meaning for her life. Margaret began dedicating her time to helping other women who had gone through similar situations. She volunteered at a shelter for abuse victims, sharing her story and offering emotional support. Every conversation she had was a reminder of her own journey, but also a reminder of how far she had come. During one meeting at the shelter, a young woman named Emily caught her attention. Emily had the same fearful eyes that Margaret had seen in the mirror months earlier, and her silence spoke louder than any word. Margaret felt an immediate connection and decided to do everything she could to help Emily feel safe again. At the same time, Margaret decided to turn Oliver's old notebook into something positive. She handed it over to an investigative journalist, who exposed the story in a series of reports that garnered national attention. The publication sparked a debate about abuse and control in relationships, giving a voice to many other women who had remained silent out of fear or shame. Over time, Margaret also decided to reconnect with her family. She hadn't seen her siblings in years, distancing herself out of shame for what she believed was a personal failure. But now, with her story being told publicly, she received an unexpected message from her younger sister, Claire. "Margaret, I saw your interview on TV. I'm so proud of you. You've always been stronger than you imagine. Can we meet? I miss you so much." Reuniting with Claire was one of the most emotional moments of Margaret's new life. Sitting in a small cafe, they talked for hours, putting the years of distance behind them. Claire not only supported her, but also encouraged Margaret to pursue her old dreams, the ones she had abandoned because of Oliver. Inspired by her conversation with Claire, Margaret decided to go back to school. She enrolled in a psychology course, aiming to become a therapist specializing in trauma. Each class was a step toward a future that now seemed much more promising. Meanwhile, Emily also began to open up. Margaret became a mentor to the young woman, helping her find a new direction. Together, they participated in awareness campaigns, speaking about the importance of recognizing signs of abuse and seeking help. The impact of Margaret's work was felt far beyond the shelter. She became an active voice in the community, organizing talks and events to educate people about healthy relationships and the dangers of emotional control. Her story inspired not only women, but also men who wanted to be allies in the fight against abuse. One night, after a crowded event at a local library, Margaret returned home and looked out the window of her small apartment. The city lights flickered like stars, and for the first time in a long while, she felt at peace. Her life wasn't perfect, but it was hers, and that was enough. The future was still a mystery, but Margaret knew she was ready to face it. Every step she took was a victory, and each day was an opportunity to make a difference. In that moment, Margaret understood that she was not just a survivor. She was a leader, an inspiration, and above all, a free woman.